Hey guys, welcome to my Fury Warrior DPS guide for Warlord's Draenor patch 6.2.4. In this guide I'll be going over what talents and glyphs you should be using, your abilities, cooldowns, and utility spells, gearing and stat priority for Fury Warriors, and then single target and AoE rotation with demonstrations of each on these dummies, and then any add-ons and macros that you could find useful for DPSing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at talents. In the first tier, you've got 3 movement speed talents, all related to your charge. Generally, you'll either go Juggernaut for a lower cooldown on your charge, or Double Time. I like Double Time because it gives you 2 charges of charge, and it allows you to move across the map or the raid field faster if there are adds or anything you need to move to, or if the boss moves a lot. The second one doesn't give you rage, so don't make a point of charging a lot, but I find this to be the most useful in Hellfire Citadel right now. In your next tier of talents, we've got 3 healing spells. Enrage Regen is what I generally go for. It's a 1-minute cooldown, heals you instantly, and then gives you a little hot, which is really nice. Second Wind doesn't happen that often, unless maybe on progression, but it doesn't give you as much control. Just whenever you dip below 35% health, you do gain a little bit of leech, so you need to be hitting the boss to get the effect off of this, and sometimes that's just not that useful or applicable. And then Impending Victory allows you to use your Victory Rush, which we'll get to, but it's your heal that's normally only available after you kill something. It allows you to use it whenever. It does a little bit of damage, and it heals you for about half the health that Victory Rush does. And if you kill something, then it resets the cooldown. I don't mind it, but it's another button to press in your DPS rotation, so I generally like Enrage Regen because it has no global cooldown, and it won't get in the way of anything else. In your third tier of talents, we've got 3 DPS boosting talents. For single target, I like Sudden Death, and when you get your full set of class trinkets and 4-piece, this will end up being the best. Furious Strikes, not the greatest. Makes your Wild Strike, which we'll get to, cost less rage, but it just doesn't quite keep up in DPS with the other talents. And then Unquenchable Thirst, if you don't have any gear, it can be nice. It allows your Rage Builder and Enrage mechanic to have no cooldown instead of a 4-second cooldown. But Sudden Death tends to be the best DPS, plus it's really fun getting free executes. And our next talent here, we do have our CC, but it also is a damage talent here. So for single target, Stormbolt is your best. It just throws a hammer and normally stuns, but if they're immune to stun, like a boss, which is what we're interested in, it does 4 times the damage. So it puts it ahead of the other talents in terms of single target. Shockwave can be useful if you need to stun a lot. For example, on Zul Harak with the Imps, if you are progressing on it and they're not dying instantly every time, Shockwave is really, really useful. And the AoE damage doesn't actually lose out that much compared to the other talent that we'll get to in a second. If it's 40-second cooldown, if you hit 3 or more targets with it, then it's reduced to 20 seconds. So it's up very often, and it's very useful for basically specifically that fight, or maybe Hellfire Assault. And then the last one is for AoE. Dragon Roar is generally the best if there's enough. If it's an AoE fight, it's a 1-minute cooldown. You knock enemies down and back a little bit, and it just does damage. Pretty simple. So pick that up for AoE most of the time, and then Stormbolt for single target. Now, the next talent here is all utility. There's Mass Spell Reflect, which turns your spell reflection into an area of effects. It can help your allies as well as you. Not super useful in raid. I had it for challenge modes, it's kind of just left it here. Safeguard, not super useful because a lot of times you'd be using it on a tank, but it is something you can use. It allows you your Intervene, which allows you to take the next attack for someone in your raid, but this Safeguard buffs it so that it now reduces damage they take by 20% as well. But you do take a hit, so you got to be careful not to kill yourself while you use it. Generally, I think Vigilance is probably the most useful. It's a 2-minute cooldown. You just use it on someone, and they take 30% less damage. It allows you to do some taunting too, but not really applicable in this current tier. So generally, go Vigilance in case someone needs a cooldown. Right, and then the 90 talent here, we've got big DPS cooldowns. We have Avatar, which is pretty simple. It's just a 1.5-minute cooldown. It transforms you, makes you do more damage for 20 seconds. It's pretty good, but once you get more gear and your tier sets and such, Bloodbath starts to outdo it in single target. So generally I'll go Bloodbath for single target or cleave fights. And all this does is, for 12 seconds, your abilities put a big dot on anything you hit. And then Bladestorm is your AoE, and it just makes you spin around and do a crap ton of damage. So AoE, Bladestorm, single target, generally Bloodbath. And then at level 100 we've got 3 more DPS talents. Anger Management just reduces your cooldowns every time you spend 30 rage by a second, and it can get you your cooldowns to come up quicker. You can use this, and if you do it really perfectly, it can out DPS the other 2 talents, but it's pretty rare, and the timing just has to line up properly. So in general, except for Hellfire Assault, in which you can't really get... Well, I'll get to this in a second, but generally you won't take Anger Management. Ravager, it's a 1 minute cooldown. It's another ability. You just put it on the ground, you click a Ravager, press it, and then you click it on the ground. It throws an axe, and it stays there and it whirls, and does a lot of damage. So in general AoE, I use Ravager. And then single target, use Siegebreaker. And it's just a button that replaces your AoE Fear, which you don't generally use anyway in Raid, and just does a lot of damage. Okay, so single target, Siegebreaker, AoE, Ravager. Now the only time you won't use Ravager for AoE is if you cannot, things move too much. So you can't get a full Ravager with enemies in it, and that's on a fight basically like Hellfire Citadel, or Hellfire Assault, excuse me. Or if on Iskard the tanks are moving the adds around too much for some reason, then you would go Anger Management just because you can't really get a good Ravager, and that lets you do your AoE stuff more. Alright, now moving on to Glyphs, there's only one that you really always want, and that is Glyph of Unending Rage. And what it does is it just gives you extra rage, which is your resource, and it's nice because you can pull up even just a little bit more rage without wasting it, and it's just always nice. Other Glyphs that are good, Glyph of Bull Rush, definitely not required, just gives you a little extra rage at the beginning of the fight or anytime you charge. When you get rage, you get extra rage, so it's kind of nice, I like it. Again, not required. Any fight like Socrathar or even Hellfire Assault, things like that where you get to interrupt a decent amount, you can use Glyph of Rude Interruption. Every time you do actually get the interrupt, you get an extra damage boost, 6% for 20 seconds. It's a little small thing, but it's something, so definitely consider that. Other mentions, Death from Above is pretty good if you want a Heroic Leap more often, but you don't need to go as far. I don't generally use this, but it is there. The Enrage speed is decent. When you're enraged, you move a little bit faster. Executor, not really that useful unless there's a lot of adds, maybe Hellfire Assault. But yeah, I'm pretty sure you have to be the one that kills it, so it's pretty rare in a raid to get that off. Heroic Leap is also decent if you want a big speed boost after your Heroic Leap. Again, I don't really find that much use for it, but some people will like that. And then that's pretty much it. There's some extra fun ones you can mess around with. Wind and Thunder. Some people will suggest this if you need to Whirlwind, but they're a little loosely stacked. But as far as Hellfire Citadel goes, it doesn't happen too often, and Whirlwind isn't that big a deal. It's more for buffing Raging Blow, which we'll get into in a bit. So now that we've gone over that, let's go ahead and look at our abilities, what we can use as a Fury Warrior, and what we have available to us. So start with our DPS skills. The first one, the main one, is Bloodthirst. It's on a really short cooldown, which is reduced by your haste. And what it does is a little damage, heals you a bit, and then it gives you 10 rage, and has a chance to, when you crit with it, it makes you enraged. And what an enraging does is it's your mastery. It increases the damage you do while you're enraged. So enraging makes you do more. So you want to have this, you use this a lot just to get enraged. We'll get into the specifics later. Do note that Bloodthirst actually has an additional 40% crit chance on itself, so on its own, so you'll crit much more often than the rest of your stuff. Next we got Wild Strike, and it's a expensive skill. It's 45 rage. It has a half second. It's like half the global cooldown, so you can spam it much quicker than the others. And it's just a rage dump, and does some cool stuff with your tier 18 4-piece and 2-piece. We have Raging Blow. And this is something that only costs 10 rage and does a fair amount of damage, but you can only use it, well, you only get procs of it rather when you are Enrage. So when you crit with your Bloodthirst, you will get a Raging Blow proc, and then you can use it. You can't just use it on its own. And then next we've got Execute, everyone's favorite warrior ability. It's 30 rage. It can generally only be used when you're below, the enemy is below 20% health. But with sudden death procs, you can use it for free sometimes, as just from auto attacking. But generally, when they're low, you'll be using this. It does a lot of damage. Feels good to spam. Alright, next we got Whirlwind. Whirlwind is an AoE ability. It doesn't do that much damage on its own, but every time you Whirlwind, you get a stack of a buff called Meat Cleaver, I believe. And what it does is, when you use Raging Blow, for every stack of that, it hits an extra target with the Raging Blow. So if I Whirlwind once, then my Raging Blow, instead of being single target, now hits 2 targets. And so on. You know, if you use 2 Whirlwinds and then Raging Blow, then it'll hit 3 targets. So it kind of allows you to cleave more with your Raging Blow. And then you've got Victory Rush, which you don't use that often, but if you kill something by chance, it is a small heal. And it does a decent amount of damage, so you're not going to lose too much DPS if you need to heal yourself with it, but it won't often be up unless there's a lot of adds on a fight. Alright, then we've got Charge, which allows you to move, charge toward an enemy, and it gives you rage, the first time at least, because I have the double time talent. Okay, then we've got some of our talents, the Stormbolt that I have, Siegebreaker, which replaces Fear, which you don't normally use anyway, and then Bloodbath, which we went over. And then that's pretty much it for damage. That's what we use to do damage. There's also Berserker Rage, which breaks Fear, but more importantly, it actually makes you enraged instantly. It's on a 30-second cooldown, and it's pretty nice if you're getting a bad string of no crits for some reason. As far as utility goes, we have Pummel and Interrupt, your melee interrupts. Pretty simple. Use it when you're supposed to. We have a Slow. Now we do have Hamstring like Arms Warriors, but it costs the same rage, does the same slow, and Piercing Howl is an AoE one around you, so I generally just use Piercing Howl. There's no reason to use Hamstring. We've got Spell Reflect, which is currently Mass Spell Reflect for me, because I took the talent. And then we've got Heroic Leap, which allows you to jump to an area like so. So you just click it and then you click the area you want to jump to. It has a minimum range and a max range. And it's pretty nice for moving, like on Archimond, between Lure Flames when you need to move from side to side. We also got Intervene, which I don't use too often. Like I said, it intercepts the next melee ranged attack within 10 seconds as long as they're in range of you, but generally it can get you killed pretty fast, so I tend not to use it. And then we have Rallying Cry, which is your one raid cooldown utility spell. It's a 3-minute cooldown, and it gives everyone extra health for a little bit. So it's like a minor raid cooldown, not the best thing, but ask your raid leader when he wants to use it. As far as cooldowns go, we've got Recklessness, which is your big DPS cooldown. It's a 3-minute cooldown. It gives you 30% extra crit chance and increases your critical strike damage. So the damage you do, the bonus damage from crits, by 10%. So it's really big. It does a lot of that, makes you do a lot of damage and crit a lot more often, which is really nice. Defensively, you do have the Enrage Regen talent, or whichever one you pick. And just pop that when you need healing. And then you've got Die by the Sword, which is your one personal defensive cooldown, really. And it just increases your parry chance, which is not relevant unless you're tanking the boss for some reason, which you generally aren't. Perhaps if you're tanking Infernals on Archimond. And then also it reduces the damage you take by 30%, which is the main defensive part that you want to use. And you've got your buffs, Battle Shout, Commanding Shout, ask them which one they need in the raid. And you can switch between stances if you need to taunt for some reason. This defensive stance does make you take less damage, but you don't get as much rage you don't get any rage really from attacking, you just get a passive thing, and you generate a lot of threat, so you might pull threat and die. So generally, just stay in battle stance, and that's that. That about covers it for the abilities you'll be using, and your cooldowns and raid utility. Alright, now let's go ahead and get into gearing and stat priorities for Fury Warriors. In general, you're going to want Mastery is going to be your best as you gear up and get your 4 set and so on, and Class Trinket. Then Crit. because you get a lot crit procs your Bloodthirst, which gives you Enrage, which makes you do more damage. They interact really well. The mastery is just that you do more damage when you're enraged, so crit and mastery kind of interact really nicely together. After that, the rest of them are kind of really not great for you. Haste is good before your class trinket because it allows you to, it lowers the cooldown of your Bloodthirst and gets you, more auto attacks, which makes you build rage faster. But after you get the class trinket, it's not as useful because you build a lot of haste passively with your class trinket. So mastery then crit, probably haste then, but multi and versatility not useful really at all. If possible, avoid them. As far as gearing goes, you do want your 4 set. Your 2 and 4 set. Your 2-piece, what it does is that when you get your Blood Surge, which is your Wild Strike crit proc, sorry, not crit proc, but just your proc, you get 2 free Wild Strikes. That's the basic ability, but the 2-piece makes it so that makes your Wild Strike crit chance becomes 100%. So you always crit with your Wild Strike when you have those procs, and it makes it do more damage. The 4-piece is every time you do crit with the Wild Strike, whether or not you have that proc, you get 30-second reduction on your Recklessness cooldown, which is your big DPS cooldown, so it's really, really, really good to have your 4-piece, and you really won't do your full potential at all until you get your 4-piece. As far as the rest of the gear goes, your legendary rings really important. Chase after those mastery and crit pieces as you can. The only tier piece I would recommend not having is the chest because it has haste and multi, which are not the best. Everything else has at least crit or strike. Crit or mastery. So those are the 4 you want: the gloves, legs, head piece, and shoulder piece. But if you have to use the chest for a 4-piece, it's really good to have the 4-piece no matter what. And then get your mastery enchants on your necks, weapons, rings, and so on. And then as far as trinkets go, you want to use Empty Drinking Horn off of Manaroth. It is your best trinket for both AoE and single target. And then your class trinket for single target is really, really good and really important to have. And then once you get it, if you need it for AoE, Discordant Chorus, because if you're switching targets a lot, so you won't get a chance to build your full stacks with your class trinket. Alright, and so that'll do it for gearing and stats. Let's go ahead and move on to your single target rotation. Now, your single target rotation is kind of broken up into 2 different areas. There's your general rotation, and then there's your sub 20% rotation, which a lot of people call the execute rotation, because that's when you can actually use execute freely, instead of just when you proc it. So the idea is a priority system. The first thing you want to know, general rule of thumb for single target, if you have a proc of sudden death, the free execute, use it, even if you're not enraged. Now, one thing to do, and do note, if you want to, if you're not enraged and you have Berserker Rage, you can use that first because it doesn't take up that global cooldown, and then execute. But if you see a proc, use it. Hopefully, if you're enraged, that's better. But even if you're not, it's because the auto attacks can proc it one after another, so you don't want to miss out on any of those. After that, the idea is you want to be enraged, so your Bloodthirst to get enraged. And if you do, well, then you get to use your cooldowns, like Bloodbath, try to line up with stuff, but Siegebreaker and then Stormbolt, in that order, because Siegebreaker does a lot more. But try to line Bloodbath up, it's just, again, off the global cooldown, so you can line it up with your other cooldowns, like Recklessness or Siegebreaker, Stormbolt. Even if you get like a sudden death proc, it's pretty good to use it then. After that, you want to use your other procs. First, your Wild Strike procs, if you have those. So try to use those because they, 1, do a lot of damage and are guaranteed crits with your 2 and 4 set. And 2, they reduce the cooldown of your Recklessness, so it's really important. And then after that, use your Raging Blow procs. If you have 2 especially, but also if you have 1, you do want to use that up so you don't waste them. They do a fair amount of damage and they're cheap. And then you go back and you try to enrage again. Just Bloodthirst when you have nothing else to do, or if you need that enrage, or extra rage to do something. One thing to note, once you lose your enrage, if you can't do anything, if you have no procs, you have no cooldowns, or even if you have your cooldowns, but you're not enraged, you will just sit there and auto attack. It's a little lame, but that's how it goes. Unless you're above 90 rage. If you're above 90 rage, use a Wild Strike to drop, so you're not over capping and wasting rage. Otherwise, just sit there and wait. Sit tight, wait. If you need to, if you have Zerker Rage, you can use it again to enrage yourself if you're getting a dry spell of no crits for some reason, which does happen from time to time. So again, execute procs, get enraged, and then Siegebreaker, Stormbolt, line up your cooldowns as you need, your Recklessness and Bloodbath, and then use your procs, your Wild Strike procs, and then your Raging Blow procs, and then Wild Strikes without procs to dump rage if you have enough. One thing to note, a couple things actually. The first, minor note, I like to use Recklessness right before I Bloodthirst, because then it gives me that 100%, well for me at least, with enough crit, it gives you a really high chance of creating with that, so you're almost guaranteed to enrage every time at the start of your big cooldown. And it's pretty short, it's just, it gives you that guarantee, almost. And the other little trick to note is when you have 2 Wild Strike procs, and say you only have 30 seconds or less on your Recklessness cooldown, just one of those, just using one of those, is going to finish that cooldown and let you use it again. So what you want to do is use that one Wild Strike cooldown proc, use Recklessness, and then use the other Wild Strike proc, so that you're not, 1, wasting it because your cooldown's already up, and 2, you are cutting into the next Recklessness cooldown, making it shorter, and you're not guaranteed to get those all the time, so it's really good to make sure you don't waste those. Now, the caveat to that is, if you are like 5 to 10 seconds out, and you're thinking, should I wait for it? Don't wait. It's generally not worth it. If you're like 1 second out, maybe 2 at the most, sure, maybe if you have like a Raging Blow proc, maybe like 1 Wild Strike, then Raging Blow, and then, it's just about time to have Recklessness up, but don't wait any more than that. I just tend to find it's not worth it. Alright, and so basically, as far as the execute rotation goes, it's the same thing. Exact same, actually. It's really the same, except that instead of dumping rage with Wild Strike, you will dump rage with execute. That is the main difference. Sudden Death procs, still top priority, still use it even if you're not enraged, and everything else comes first, except for Raging Blow. You don't generally use it because it's not worth it. There are very specific situations, but I would recommend not. For those who are interested in that little bit, it's if you're not enraged, but you still have the proc, which you get a couple seconds of that, and you can't do anything else, then you can use it, but in general, just same rotation, drop Raging Blow, and just execute to dump rage. Siegebreaker does more than execute, so just things to consider in the execute rotation. If you're at that last, 1%, 0.5% of the boss, and you're like, what skill should I use at the end? Siegebreaker does the most out of Siegebreaker, Stormbolt, and execute. Then execute does more than that, and then Stormbolt does less than that, but it's free. So again, you would use this in a, like, if the boss is still fairly healthy, like 15% or 20%, so still Siegebreaker, then Stormbolt, and then execute to dump rage. You will still use your Wild Strike procs both for the cooldown and because it's like auto crit, it's guaranteed crit, and you can basically fit 2 of those in the time of one execute, which makes it do more damage effectively in the same amount of time. So same thing though, try to stay enraged as much as possible. Sudden Death, use those right away, and then just dump rage with execute and use your cooldowns as you can. Now I can't really demonstrate that for you because these dummies out heal, one person's damage, but again, just keep that in mind. Just basically get rid of Raging procs, don't even use that, don't use Raging Blow, and instead of dumping with Wild Strike, dump with execute. Only difference. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and show you the single target rotation on this dummy, the little commentary of what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, and I'll get into the opener in a little bit in its own section after the AoE rotation and demonstration. We'll go ahead and start here, so we'll charge in, and then pop ring, cooldowns, and then get enraged here, execute proc, and then use your cooldown Siegebreaker, Stormbolt, Raging Blow proc, and then we got execute proc, so we'll Wild Strike there a little bit. Now we have no rage, so we're just going to sit here. And we'll Bloodthirst, proc, and then Wild Strike again, and we'll Bloodthirst. We have nothing to do, so we sit here. And we'll do it again. So now I'm not enraged, so I could use Zerker Rage if I want to here, get rid of that proc, use Wild Strike, Bloodthirst, another proc of Raging Blow, then Wild Strike to dump, and then, Bloodthirst. So I'm not getting too many crits here, so I'll use this. Now I have Execute, so I'll use that. Then Bloodthirst. Now I get procs here, so I'll use Wild Strike first, and then I'll use Raging Blow, and then Wild Strike to dump. Raging Blow proc, Wild Strike to dump Rage, back to Bloodthirst, Raging Blow, then we got a cooldown up, and we're enraged, so we'll go ahead and use that. Wild Strike, and you see I'm almost here, so I'll use this, Recklessness, and then the second Wild Strike proc. We got a Execute proc, so we'll use that. Bloodthirst is up, Bloodbath is up, Raging Blow with that, dump Rage, and then we'll have Wild Strike procs. We have Stormbolt, Execute, Raging Blow proc, and use Wild Strike to dump some Rage, then back to Bloodthirst, Raging Blow proc, and so on. So you're always dumping Rage with Wild Strike, use your procs, and then Bloodthirst when you have nothing else to do, or you need to get enraged. So proc again, Wild Strike, and we got Execute here, so use that always on top priority. And then we just keep going like that. Dump all your procs, 2 of these, pop that. We have cooldowns, so we'll use those now, and we're enraged. And then you just keep going. Now, if this is Execute, we would be using, we ignore this, we'd use Execute, and so on. Oh, we've got a proc there. And then you just dump Rage with Execute. And that's it. And that is the single target rotation. And you just keep going like that. And generally, I'm just popping cooldowns as I see them. You just keep an eye, again, keep that timer in mind, about 40 seconds approximately on average that I'll get Recklessness up, because thanks to the 4-piece. So keep that in mind if you're thinking, do I have enough time to Recklessness and potentially, line it up with the ring coming up. And yeah, so that is single target rotation. And now we'll go ahead and move on to the AoE rotation. Let's go ahead and switch our talents here. And I'll show you the one with Ravager. Again, if you're using Anger Management, it's just passive. Things will come up faster, so nothing to do there. And basically, it's the same rotation, except you'll still use Execute when you can, unless you're in a big AoE phase and you have all your cooldowns. You have your Ravager, your Bladestorm, your Dragon Roar. For example, on Iskar, when the ads come out, even though you might get a sudden death proc on the ads, when you charge in and you get Bloodthirst to get enraged, go ahead and use the Bladestorm and stuff. That does a lot more. But in general, outside of those cooldowns, still get rid of that Execute, those sudden death procs. They do a lot of damage. Then, of course, you're still trying to get enraged, but instead of dumping with Wild Strike, you're going to be using Whirlwind to give you those stacks for Raging Blow that will make them cleave instead of just hit one target. And you want to generally use enough Whirlwinds so that you hit everything with Raging Blow, but some of those ads, there's too many, so you don't want to go for all of them. Like on Iskar, the first ad wave, there's 7, including the big ad. You don't want to Whirlwind 6 times. That's too much Rage you're using. So get maybe a few in, make sure you have enough to use Raging Blow right away. So Whirlwind, and make sure you're still enraged when you Raging Blow to get maximum damage there. So it'll be Enrage, get rid of any Execute procs outside of the cooldowns. Enrage, Whirlwind, to get a few stacks, but when you're getting low on Rage, then Raging Blow, and make sure you still have that Enrage buff, and then carry on, get another Enrage if you can, and so on. With the cooldowns, you'll want to drop your Ravager first, then get Enraged, so Bloodthirst, and if it doesn't crit, then you can use Berserker Rage, then Bladestorm immediately, and then out of Bladestorm, immediately spam Dragon Roar. And the reason you want to do that is because Bladestorm is your biggest AoE. It contributes to a huge amount of your DPS, and you want to be enraged the entire duration of it. And it goes for 6 seconds. So when you enrage, it lasts for 7 seconds. And you want to make sure that you don't miss any of it. And Dragon's Roar you can generally catch at the end, but there's that extra global if you use Dragon Roar first, where you may cut off Bladestorm. In terms of catching all the enrage. So Bladestorm first, so Ravager, drop that first, then charge in or something, or move in, then get enraged, either through Bloodthirst or Berserker Rage, and then Bladestorm, and then Dragon Roar. Obviously, if you need to cooldown, I would Recklessness right before Bladestorm. But yeah. So Ravager kind of goes first. So I'll show you how it goes a little bit on these dummies now. I'm just going to show it for a little bit, maybe 2 rounds of the cooldowns. So again, we're about to go in, so we'll drop Ravager first before you charge in. And this is even mid-fight. Say like on Iska, you're all the way at the end, and you're coming into the ads. So you drop the Ravager first where hopefully they're going to leave them. Alright, then we'll charge in, got the ring, cooldown, Enrage here, and you see I have this, but I'm going to Blade Storm first. Because it does so much damage. Then I'll spam this to make sure I get it. And then I'll use Execute. And then kind of get enraged here, and I'll use this to get enraged. And I'll Whirlwind twice to make sure I'm hitting these 3 targets. And Whirlwind, I have Execute now. I'll try to Whirlwind again, I know I have enough rage. And then try to enrage again. Alright, now here I only have enough for 1, so I'll use, 1 Whirlwind and then go with that. You still Wild Strike just like in single target. Still high priority before you Whirlwind and do your basic rotation. So you just keep going like this. Now you can Whirlwind without the proc, just to build the stacks, but you want to make sure you're enraged. And here I am missing it, so I'm going to go ahead and use Zerker Rage to get that enraged. Raging Blow, dump with Wild Strike, and then just Whirlwind some more. And it keeps going like this, and you just dump Wild Strike with the proc. I actually used it incorrectly earlier. And notice we're coming up on stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and drop Ravager, Wild Strike a little bit, get enraged, and then Blade Storm. And then Dragon's Roar as out of it as I can. And then I'll execute because I have, I lost the proc, but that's okay. A couple of these, a couple Whirlwinds, and then Raging Blow, Whirlwind. I get enraged again, execute. And then Whirlwind. And then keep going like that. So you see these stacks here of Meat Cleaver allow your Raging Blow to hit things. And that's how you AoE, generally. Execute is still high priority. So make sure you do use those, except when you have your cooldowns coming up. So just Whirlwind instead of Wild Strike to build those cleaver procs, those meat cleavers. And just keep an eye to make sure that you don't waste them. So Wild Strike here. And the only reason you use the procs of Wild Strike, besides the fact that they do a lot of damage, is again the cooldown reduction on Recklessness, which you want to have up for as many, Blade Storm, Ravager, Dragon Roar combinations as you can. I'm going to get one more here, so we'll drop the Ravager, I'll Enrage, Blade Storm. I use Zerker Rage this time, because I just used this, Bloodthirst, and then I'll Dragon Roar out, and then execute off. Except I lost that, but that's okay. It's worth the DPS there. And that's generally how you AoE. Alright, now let's go ahead and talk about openers briefly here. So the opener, generally, what I'll do, you pot, pre-pot, about 3 seconds or so. If you're doing AoE with the Ravager, which I don't think there's a fight in Hellfire Citadel that I can think of where you would need to Ravager off the bat. But if you do, drop the Ravager and then charge in. And after you charge, then, hopefully someone will ring, but you'll Recklessness for single target mostly. Recklessness, then Bloodbath if you have it, or Avatar. And then just go with your rotation. Again, I like the Recklessness before the Bloodthirst because it guarantees that Enrage proc and the crit. And then you just go off with your rotation. You can use Siegebreaker and so on. Siegebreaker, Stormbolt after the executes. So, get enraged. At the beginning, you can get enraged first. And then, because you're pretty much guaranteed an instant sudden death proc every fight at the very, very beginning. So, pre-pot, charge in, Ravager first if you have that, but again, in Hellfire you don't really. So charge in cooldowns, Recklessness, and Bloodbath, and then, Siegebreaker, Stormbolt, and so on. After execute first, of course. So it's not really like a tricky opener in a way. I just like to make sure you pop your cooldowns before you enrage yourself, just to make sure you get that. Now, as far as macros and add-ons, I don't use any macros really on this guy. I have a couple here. There were PvP ones, but they're not relevant to raid at all. If you want to use Intervene for some reason, or Safeguard, if you take that talent, I use a mouse over macro. But again, I really don't recommend using that ability in raid. I prefer you take Vigilance and use that instead. But add-ons, it's really, really important to track your Enrage buff. And you want to know when you're enraged and how much time you have left. I use a Power Aura, and I'll go ahead and link that in the description below, as well as other possible add-ons like Weak Auras or TellMeWhen that you can use to just track when you have, Enrage buff, and of course you can always track your trinket buffs and procs, and which I actually don't have with these, but you could track like your weapon procs, for example. And yeah, so those are the only add-ons and macros I use, and so generally I will kind of go light as far as those go, but I will link those in the description. Let me know if you guys like this video. Feel free to hit it with a like, maybe subscribe to the channel if you're interested in more guides, and I hope you liked it. Cheers.